Could you survive Black Widow training? We're not just talking about learning how to fight. We're talking about a place where your identity gets erased, where pain becomes routine, and where even your biology is controlled. Surviving just 24 hours in this brutal environment that shaped Natasha Romanoff would be nearly impossible. But what actually made the Red Room one of the most inhumane training programs in fiction? And does anything like it exist in the real world? Let's find out. From the moment a girl was chosen for the Red Room, she stopped being a child. She lost her name, her family, her freedom. The goal was crystal clear: erase every trace of individuality and transform her into a living weapon. But here's the truly terrifying part. The process wasn't just physical, it was psychological warfare. While real training programs, like those used by Russian Spetsnaz or American Special Forces, demand discipline and endurance, the Red Room demanded something far more sinister: absolute obedience. Not as value, but as programming. In the Marvel Universe, the forced sterilization of Black Widows serves as a shocking symbol of this control. It's an extreme and irreversible technique that doesn't find direct parallels even in the most secretive espionage programs of the real world. In reality, schools like the famous Sparrow School in Kazan, in the former Soviet Union, focused on psychological control. Yes, but they never went to the point of biologically manipulating their agents. In the Red Room, any emotional bond was seen as weakness. Showing empathy was grounds for punishment. The girls were isolated, manipulated, and constantly monitored. All of this to ensure that their only source of affection or approval came from the system itself. This bears a striking resemblance to the Soviet Union's illegals program, where agents were trained from childhood to live under false identities, cutting all ties with their previous lives. Many spent years living a lie, creating relationships and even families that were, deep down, part of the mission. The psychological cost? Enormous. Constant paranoia, fragmented identity, permanent fear of exposure. And the body? Constantly pushed to its limits. Studies on sleep deprivation show that a person can begin to lose rational judgment in just 3 to 4 days without sleep. Now imagine being exposed to 24-hour training, 7 days a week, with physical combat tests, without rest, and severe punishments for any mistake. Exhaustion wasn't a side effect, it was a tool. This type of isolation and conditioning also mirrors what happens with child soldiers in war zones, cutting emotional connections, punishing vulnerability, and using pain as a learning system. With each error, a punishment. With each display of affection, brutal correction. This created operatives with total focus on efficiency, but completely dehumanized. The scars left by this type of training aren't just physical, they're emotional. Trauma specialists identify that victims of extreme indoctrination, like former child soldiers or human trafficking victims, often spent the rest of their lives dealing with PTSD, hypervigilance, and the inability to trust. And Natasha? She survived all of this. She escaped and still found the strength to fight for a greater ideal. But how does the Red Room compare to the most intense real-world training programs? Is there anything remotely similar? Training programs like those of the Navy SEALs in the United States and the Spetsnaz in Russia are famous for their brutality, but there's a fundamental difference: the objective. These programs don't try to erase who you are. They try to push you to your limits. Yes, but to make you stronger, more resilient, more reliable, not to turn you into a puppet. In the SEALs Hell Week, for example, candidates sleep about 4 hours total over 6 entire days. The rest of the time is spent facing freezing water, endless obstacles, and physical tests under constant pressure. But even in the midst of chaos, instructors encourage teamwork. It's there that deep bonds are formed that last a lifetime. A soldier doesn't survive alone. The dropout rate? About 70 to 80%. Most don't make it, and even those who survive come out of training with their identities intact. Wounded, yes, but human. The Spetsnaz face challenges like hand-to-hand combat against instructors, crossing frozen rivers, forest survival without supplies. It's insane, but again, the focus is autonomy, not personality erasure. The training demands courage, yes, but also intelligence, improvisation, and sometimes even creativity. In the Red Room, no. There, you weren't trained to think. You were trained to obey. Any trace of humanity was eliminated. Sterilization in fiction symbolizes this: absolute control over body and mind. And perhaps most cruel, in real programs, if you quit, you leave. In the Red Room, quitting wasn't an option. It was punishment. It was death. It was disappearance. This difference is crucial. Training like the SEALs builds soldiers. The Red Room deconstructs people. But here's something that might surprise you about real elite training. The US military discovered that soldiers who maintained some sense of individual identity actually performed better in combat. Studies from the Korean War showed that prisoners of war who held on to personal memories and relationships were more resistant to enemy interrogation and brainwashing attempts. The Red Room's approach of complete identity erasure would actually create less effective operatives in many real-world scenarios. The psychological research backs this up. Dr. Stanley Milgram's famous obedience experiments in the 1960s showed that while people can be conditioned to follow orders, those with stronger individual identities were more likely to resist when those orders conflicted with their moral compass. The Red Room's total control might create perfect assassins, but it would also create agents who couldn't adapt or think creatively when missions went sideways. Let's suppose you survive the psychological part. All right, that you can still remember who you are. What about the physical aspect? Can you fight like Natasha? Spoiler alert, probably not. Black Widow masters styles like Aikido, Judo, Karate, and Savate. Each of these require 3 to 5 years to master, and that's if you train with total focus. Now, imagine combining all these styles fluidly while jumping off a building and taking down 3 armed guys. You can't learn that in a weekend self-defense course. In Captain America, the Winter Soldier, for example, we see Natasha switch between styles in seconds, from rapid strikes to ground immobilizations. This requires more than technique. It requires instant adaptation, something that only comes with years and years of intensive training. And it's not just about technique. The body needs to be at an absurd level of conditioning. Those famous leg spins she uses to take down enemies demand explosive strength, balance, coordination, and muscular endurance. Professional fighters train for years to have this control. And even then, many can't repeat it in real combat. Not to mention weapon proficiency. Natasha uses pistols, knives, batons, improvised weapons, all with mastery. Just to give you an idea, a Special Forces elite marksman fires between 500 to 1,000 rounds per week just to maintain precision. And that's not counting bladed weapons. Now add Olympic-level acrobatics to all of this. Yes, what she does requires the kind of training that professional gymnasts start in childhood. Rolls, somersaults, total body balance, and all of this in the middle of a fight. Of course, part of this ability comes from the mysterious enhancements of the Red Room in the Marvel Universe. She's stronger, faster, more resistant than the average human. But even with that, the level of discipline and preparation required to get close to Natasha is practically superhuman. Let's put this in perspective with real numbers. A professional MMA fighter trains about 6 to 8 hours a day, focusing on 2 to 3 martial arts maximum. Olympic gymnasts train 6 to 8 hours daily from age 6 onward. Elite marksmen practice 4 to 6 hours daily with firearms. Natasha would need to excel at all of these simultaneously at the highest level possible. The human body has limits. Sports science tells us that peak performance in multiple disciplines is nearly impossible due to conflicting muscle memory and training requirements. A powerlifter's body type conflicts with a marathon runner's needs. A gymnast's flexibility training can actually reduce the explosive power needed for combat sports. And even if you somehow achieve the physical aspects, there's still the biggest challenge of all: the mind. This is where things get really dark. Being a super spy, like Black Widow, means living in constant alert, hiding your emotions, and accepting that any emotional bond can be used against you. It's a life of paranoia, loneliness, and emptiness. The Red Room used tactics that started early. Natasha's childhood with Yelena and her spy parents was a carefully constructed lie. Just like the agents of the illegals program, who lived decades under false identities, creating children and friendships that were, deep down, part of the mission. This type of emotional manipulation destroys any clear sense of reality, but the darkest aspect was memory manipulation. Natasha was conditioned to forget, to rewrite her own history. In fiction, this is taken to the extreme, but in real life, techniques like gaslighting and compartmentalization are used by agencies to make agents divide their lives into separate mental boxes. The price? Anxiety, depression, dissociation. Real intelligence agencies have documented the psychological toll on deep cover operatives. The CIA's own internal studies, declassified decades later, showed that agents who spent more than 5 years in deep cover had a 60% higher rate of suicide attempts compared to regular operatives. The human mind wasn't designed to live multiple lives simultaneously. The legendary Soviet agent Rudolf Abel, who spent 9 years undercover in New York, later described the experience as living in a constant state of suspended animation. He couldn't form real relationships, couldn't express genuine emotions, couldn't even trust his own memories, of which personality was authentic. And yes, sterilization in fiction is symbolic, but the message is real. Your body is no longer yours. Your life belongs to the mission. Your past, erased. The psychological manipulation techniques used by the Red Room mirror real-world methods documented in declassified government files. The MK program, for instance, experimented with memory alteration, personality fragmentation, and behavioral control. While these experiments were largely unsuccessful and inhumane, they showed that the concept of creating programmable agents wasn't purely fiction. Dr. Ewan Cameron, a psychiatrist involved in MK developed techniques called psychic driving, essentially attempting to erase a person's personality and rebuild it from scratch. Patients were given massive doses of LSD, subjected to prolonged sensory deprivation, and forced to listen to repeated messages for weeks. The results were devastating. Patients lost their identities, couldn't recognize family members, and required years of rehabilitation. All of this makes Natasha's journey even more impressive. She recovered her identity. She made friends. She built trust with people like Steve Rogers, Clint Barton, and other Avengers. She challenged everything she was taught to believe. And that, more than any kick or acrobatic move, is what makes Black Widow one of the most fascinating figures in the Marvel Universe. Because recovering humanity after being programmed to destroy it, that's pure heroism. In the end, what makes Natasha Romanoff so impressive isn't just her fighting ability or her impossible missions. It's the fact that she was created to be a weapon and chose to be a human. The Red Room tried to erase everything she was and failed. Now here's the question for you. If a Navy SEAL, a Spetsnaz operative, or an illegals program agent were thrown into the Red Room, who would survive the longest? The SEALs' teamwork mentality might actually be a liability in an environment that punishes emotional connections. The Spetsnaz operatives' independence could be both an asset and a target for the Red Room's control mechanisms. The illegal agents' experience with identity manipulation might give them an edge, but also make them more vulnerable to the Red Room's psychological warfare. The answer might surprise you. Based on psychological research and historical accounts, the person most likely to survive would be someone who had already experienced extreme trauma and developed what psychologists call post-traumatic growth, the ability to find meaning and strength through suffering. This isn't someone who's been trained to be tough. It's someone who's learned to preserve their core identity, even when everything else is stripped away. That's exactly what makes Natasha's story so compelling. She didn't just survive the Red Room, she transcended it. She proved that no matter how complete the programming, no matter how thorough the conditioning, the human spirit can find a way to break free. And that's a lesson that extends far beyond comic books and movies. It's a reminder that our humanity isn't something that can be easily erased, no matter how hard anyone tries.